Okay, so I'll start off with a question actually. Well, not really a question, but an observant. When I was reading the tobacco use disorder part of the DSM-5 readings, I noticed it said that it's based off your environment, and those who are in a low socioeconomic class are more likely to smoke and use tobacco. And then I thought about it, those who are rich and in the upper class, they smoke a lot of cigars, and it's seen as classy. There was those clubs in like the 90s, like men's clubs or something that men would just go and smoke cigars and talk and drink whiskey. And so it's kind of like cigars are still tobacco, but it's just not seen as negative, I guess, because it's more in a classy way where people see cigarettes in more of a disclassy way, even though both are tobacco use. I thought that was really interesting how the DSM-5 hit on that and how I can see now why it does get a little bit of backlash for its bias because it's not taking into account how all social classes uses tobacco is just hitting on the ones who use it with cigarettes and in the lower class versus cigar use, if that makes sense.
That's an interesting point that I hadn't really considered. I'd be curious to see like the demographics of that, of like what is the use of non-cigarette tobacco amongst wealthier people.
Yeah.
I also feel like you don't inhale a cigar, so maybe it's not as addictive as a cigarette or chew is. So maybe that could be a factor in
I
that.
didn't even know that. I just see men smoking cigars.
I mean, I
Well,
also,
to add to that
if you
point,
want to go first.
I'll go ahead.
No, you can go. I'll patiently wait. I always talk when other
I was,
people talk.
I was going to be short and sweet anyways. Uh, Typically, when people smoke cigars, they don't smoke them like cigarettes. They're going to not smoke 10 cigars a day.
Yeah.
Right.
They're going to
Mm.
smoke one, two. It's more like a social drinking type thing.
You
Uh,
put it out, save it for later, a little bit more later.
yeah.
Well, I know, like, even back, it's kind of like special occasions. Like, even back in the day, like when I was born, like, they gave, like, my dad a cigar in the hospital. Like,
Right.
and I'm early 30s. So, like, it's not like it was like, oh, here's
You broke up a little bit, Shauna.
Okay, I thought that was my end. I was like, oh no.
I had to
Okay.
make fun of it for a second. I just had to. We'll see if she comes back because she's stuck.
Right.
Yeah. But I guess what I want to add to that is my father-in-law, he smokes cigars, and when I tell you this man has like a nice box and they're laid out in this velvet wrap and it's a very expensive collection, but it's just like as compared to, cigarettes, you can go get a pack of cigarettes for I don't know, maybe what, less than $10. But then when you come to cigars, it's such an expensive habit and there's ways to basically prepare the cigar. You have to cut it right. You don't have to inhale it all the way, like you were saying earlier, Kyle. So it's just like, I guess it really just depends on like what Kayla was saying earlier with like the social economic background, as far as like cigarettes are so much more easier to avoid or to purchase rather than cigars because it's such an expensive habit.
Right. Well, let's take it to a more extreme example of like cocaine use, for example.
Mm,
Amongst there's the classic Wall Street,
Yeah.
Wall Street type thing,
yeah,
and it's almost the exact same components as crack cocaine in terms of what it does to you physiologically and psychologically, but because of
right,
stigma and because of socioeconomic status, those two things are treated differently.
right. I like that. That was a good point.
And I think we're able to see those in the lower classes use these drugs more often because they're more in the news. Those who are homeless, like it's right in front of our faces, where those who do have money, they have ways to hide it. They do it behind the closed doors and at their parties. And so we're not seeing it as often, even though we know it's happening, because when it happens and it gets put on the news like Diddy, it's very big. But since it's not right in front of our faces all the time, we don't automatically think of them when we think of drugs because it's not in our faces, even though sometimes they are the ones that are doing it to the higher extent.
Right? It's part of that psychosocial aspect.
Well, and the other part is it's not considered a problem until it affects your life. So
Right.
you have more money and you have more means, then you're going to have the ability to get away with it more than someone who uses it and next thing you know, I mean, just the amount of use creates not being able to pay your bills, running into issues. You're going to get more legal problems because you don't have as easy way to get out of it.
Yeah.
Better lawyers, there's all these other, social, psychosocial factors that really go into play too on that side of
Right.
it.
And I'm gonna try to leave my video off. I don't know what's going on with my internet, but
Oh yeah, you're back. Yay.
I made fun of it,
apparently
so
it wants
I
to be
promise.
fussy. So what I was I'm back. What I was gonna say earlier is like I think even like certain types of like even not cigars, but other cigarettes or like smokeless tobacco is like stigmatized. It like the brands because it's like there's certain brands I feel like when I have clients that when I was a case manager taking them into a gas station, it was like, what's your cheapest pack of cigarettes? And then they're trying like they would count out their change. So like even compared to someone who um is like middle class that is smoking but has like a specific brand that they always buy versus someone that's like, hey, what is your cheapest? Oh, you have that one on sale? Like I will buy that one. And then and I feel like sometimes like the Zins and different things now, like it's more socially acceptable and
Mhm.
especially for like females. It's like weird how certain types of like tobacco are more like socially acceptable versus other ones, at least in like the area I'm in. But I don't know if that's like universal to like all of the United States.
I
I
think it
think
is, especially with vaping and stuff. I feel like that changed a lot of the game in terms of that perception. Um, yeah.
For sure. I see a lot more females vaping than smoking cigarettes. I
Yeah.
think it kind of, and I think sometimes females do actually prefer to smoke cigarettes, honestly, but they might see vaping as cleaner, and they like a man might not want me if I smell like cigarette smoke, even though they can smoke cigarettes. But if I vape, then I can still get that nicotine that I need, but I'm not seen as dirtier because I will like if I see someone vaping, it feels so normal just at the age that I'm in and no one around me smokes cigarettes because we just cannot stand the smell. But then everyone who's older all smokes cigarettes and they don't vape. So I feel like it also goes with the age, but for sure I do believe women just find it to be cleaner to vape than smoke cigarettes, even if they don't want to.
Not to mention it was sort of pushed as healthier and
Mm.
less addictive, which is a separate conversation. But yeah,
Yeah.
all those things tie into um, that environmental factor of that sort of somatic addiction or that sort of addiction.
And they're easier to hide too. Cause it's like I remember my friends in high school, they had a vape and they would just do it. And I remember I would always say to me, "You smell like blueberries. Did someone like light a candle?" It's just like I wasn't doing it, but it's like that's funny. Like she didn't even think of anything else. She just thought of a candle because truly, like you can't really smell a vape, in my opinion, unless like you are watching the person do it.
Right.
Right.
Which goes with weed as well, like dabs. I've noticed people that do dabs, it doesn't stick on their clothes as much as smoking an actual blunt does. Like I've seen people do dabs and I won't be able to actually tell they did it unless they told me or if I was in the room versus weed. It will like linger forever, kind of like cigarette in a car. And so
Yeah.
I feel like that also is like not same as tobacco use, but like people I think are getting more into dabs now because it's easier to hide, get some better high, and then it doesn't leave as much residue as like smoking a blunt does. Mm. And then there was four elements of the treatment plan that I also wrote notes on, which was like the behavioral definition of problems, the impressions and case conceptualization, the into operational goals, and then outcomes and measures of change, which was kind of hard to like understand everything without actually seeing like an example of a treatment plan.
Yeah.
Right.
Cause I'm like, I don't really know like how that is supposed to be like written out in an actual plan. Like all the information made sense to me, but I was like, I don't actually know how that like gets put into a document.
And that's kind of like what I was saying before we started the recording is, again, in my experience, each agency and each state kind of has its own preferred way of doing that within the standards of profession, of course. So it is one of those things where you kind of learn it. You'll learn it by doing it and get those examples, and it is pretty straightforward. They do sort of feed into themselves. Of you have the conceptualization, you have the diagnosis, and that leads to the goals and the outcomes themselves feed into the goals, and from there the interventions flow from that. And it is just sort of your roadmap and your blueprint of what you're going to do to help this person in a way that has measurable outcomes so that you can both prove and also follow how their progress is tracking. Although finding
Yeah.
measurable outcomes can be tricky sometimes, depending on the
Oh, for
situation.
sure. That's the
I
thing.
know.
Measurable outcomes are hard. Sometimes we keep doing the same, but certain things that you will do during an assessment, there's certain assessment tools you can use to try to do in the beginning and then do them later. Beyond that, and I love what it tried to be clear about in the book here was just progress in their lives in these areas, whether it's behaviorally, whether it's psychosocially, the environment, jobs, like all the elements can be considered as measures to use to make success in those areas.
Right. I know when I was using um like as a case manager when we make goals, like we'd have to put in there like if their goal was to like get a job, we'd have to put like the basically the medical necessity. So like they have a diagnosis of XYZ, which like then you have to include the barriers. So like this is
Oh, interesting.
why this is like with this diagnosis, they need like case management because like they need assistance with like and then our objectives would be like completing so many job applications, like
Mhm.
doing the different things. So then you're like, oh, if you complete 5 applications by like this date, or get so many interviews, or working on interview skills once a week. So then like once a week, that's measurable. Like a lot of the things that become measurable based off their goal, but then they also had us like use their diagnosis and why is it like basically medically necessary? Why are we doing this? So we can't just say like they want to watch like unicorn movies just for fun. Like, but I
And then you
feel like
adjust as you go.
as we become like a counselor, like I could foresee it like even if it's like their mood, like if they rank their mood, like when we do the mental like status exam or different things where they're ranking their current mood as like a 2, and if we're like we want to increase their like self-reported mood by if it's like so many numbers, like this is in my head where I'm thinking possibly, but I don't know if this will be it. Then like at like whether it's quarterly when we check in with them, like, hey, how would you rate like your average like mood from a 0 to 10 to see like if there is progress. But that's kind of in my head how I'm putting the pieces together of like to make sense to
Yeah.
me.
As the chapter said, it becomes like a narrative almost over time.
Yep.
And of course, you adjust as you go. Either they blew past this objective marker, or they're not going to make it. So let's make it achievable for them.
Yep. Baby steps or like
Yes,
do.
exactly. I really like the idea of adding the barriers in specifically of what is going to make what is the thing to look out for, both
Hmm.
as the counselor and the client, of like, what is something that it will hinder you in some way. And then you can address that as it comes up because you're on the lookout.
Hmm.
And I was gonna say, you gotta utilize a lot of self-reporting, some behavioral things you can notice in your counseling sessions. But again, that's a judgment call on yours. So I agree. Self-reporting's a biggie, and other assessment tools to go back through and have a full-on change from first assessment to later assessment on the same type of assessment can give you a difference on whether they're still depressed as much or those kind of changes you can show physically. But you do have to show that. And I think they're real clear about that because they make comments to that for HMOs, that needed for also, and actually they brought up, lawsuits. They brought up, just anybody needing to go back through, and this is your way of proving yourself also.
Mm.
What you're doing is has some progress. And that's the only way you're going to have to this is your tool to cover your butt and give yourself a process to go. You
Yes.
know, you have something tangible to follow. So,
I think it also depends a lot on your approach too. Like if you're approaching purely from a cognitive behavioral standpoint, that's going to be way more focused on those measurable concrete goals versus say psychodynamic, which is maybe a little more abstract in what it is that you're trying to achieve.
Right.
I like how you brought up lawsuits because this like the case I'm about to talk about has nothing to do with therapists, but it kind of makes me like I'm sure there's been times where therapists have actually aided their clients to do bad things for their own benefit, and that went away, and how like having these treatment plans and showing that like you actually were trying to help them is it important? Because I always think of this one girl, I forgot her name, but she was able to coerce her boyfriend to kill himself through a bunch of text messages.
Oh,
Oh, I
wow.
remember that.
And it makes me think of like having like the treatment plan, having all this documentation for lawsuits, because truly sometimes like they have to make sure if a client was in therapy and things went awry that you were actually doing stuff to help them, and there was nothing said or done in therapy that could have maybe even aided in someone committing an act or something. I'm sure that has happened many times. I just cannot think of any.
I can promise you it's happened at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are no unique experiences, I think, in the world.
Nope.
Or even just someone having a dual relationship with their client and it becoming an affair or something that could even be used in a lawsuit against the wife and her husband, and how like their therapist was having an affair. Like that can definitely have more weight than just a normal affair in a marriage.
Oh, for sure, because the power imbalance. That's for so many reasons, on so many levels.
And then everything that person
That's
then did in
funny.
that marriage might even be due to their therapist telling them that they were valid, even though they're having an affair. So everything the therapist was saying is fully out the door. And then in the eating disorder video, I didn't take many notes from it just because I was like getting it all in my system. But one question I thought about during the video was how it differs between ages. Because I feel like in the media, we see a lot of young people having eating disorders. But I feel like we don't see adults as much have eating disorders, although we see adults put it on their kids to have them. But yet we don't see it portrayed in adults as much. So I wondering if everyone knows like the prevalence rate between adults and kids having eating disorders, or the difference in how it's like shown between the two ages.
Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely. By that same token, I even though I know this, I always like it never like enters the front of my mind when I hear eating disorder. Like the first thing I think is always specifically like with things like anorexia nervosa, skinny, extremely underweight, but it doesn't necessarily have to look like that. And to your
right.
same point, I think a lot of that is media representation.
hmm but I know like at the end of the video how it talks about like some of the truths about like some of the eating disorders, how many people with eating disorders they look healthy but they're extremely ill. So I think kind of that's why it's more identified sometimes in kids is because when you have a parent that's like feeding you lunch or dinner, it's easier to see if they're not eating. Where as an adult, you're the one who's doing the dinner, so it's easier to like for someone not to pick up on it because it's not like someone is feeding us, because we feed ourselves. So if I don't eat dinner, the only one who's not going to notice, like depending again on like what your spouse, if they're home or not, like it could definitely like go undeterred or like undetected for a while. Whereas a kid, if you're consistently not eating dinner or eating so much that they have to buy more food because all of the snacks are gone within a day of grocery shopping, like I think that's where it might be easier to be to detect in kids because someone else is
Yeah.
buying the food and providing the food for like meals.
Yeah, and
Um,
the medium focuses a lot for some reason on anorexia specifically, whereas bulimia and binge eating, you are eating stuff. So like, I feel like a lot of times they can still maintain the weight and they look
mhm.
healthy, but they're not because then their teeth are getting, it's like teeth, heartburn, acid reflux. Like it's affecting their interior more than it's affecting their exterior. And maybe that's why the media doesn't hit on it as much because anorexia kind of is easier, I guess, to demonstrate, even though bulimia is, I think, a very high one. And I could see maybe those who are older participating in bulimia more because they're able to probably hide that as well more than not eating at all.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
let's be real, until very recently, overweight, that sort of weight issue was treated as a joke in many media representations.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because you're never in society's eyes, especially pertaining towards women, you're never skinny enough and you're never quote unquote thick enough. So it's just like
Right.
with bulimia nervosa like kind of coming into play as far as like coming out of your adolescence into your like mid 20s, I see a lot of women going through that because they'll go through an episode where they eat the foods that they love or that, some form that food becomes like a way to cope with like how they feel on a daily basis. But then say if they go and scroll on social media and they see what they could have or what they could have looked like, then they go through the episodes of purging. So it's just like we have to think about society and social media playing a huge factor when it comes to eating disorders.
Absolutely.
And what did you guys think about like the one thing that stood out to me was at the like one of the nine truths that in the end of the eating disorder video was how they talked about the eating disorders like have an increased risk for like suicide. Um,
Yes.
Oh,
what are your guys' thoughts on that?
when I think of that, I think of when you are not eating, you don't have energy. You become more irritable. You can become more angry. Like I know when I haven't eaten in a while because I just forgot. Like I am so angry. Like I just it makes everything worse. And so I
Yeah.
definitely see someone who is because when I think of eating disorders, I usually a lot of times think of anxiety, depression stemming from the eating disorder due to the hatred of their own body. And so when you're not having that energy in your system and those nutrients, it's starting to shut down everything else. I think they're more easy to have suicidal ideation and act on suicidal ideation because they're probably more irritable and they just are not able to think clearly enough and might not even realize the outcomes that that could have.
Well, also the other side of that I was thinking about is usually eating disorders center around not feeling good about someone, them feeling good about themselves, whether that's image, whether that's fitting in, areas of self-worth and not feeling good about yourself can be also connected to the ideas of not being able to fit, that it's never going to work out. The negative aspects of those type of thoughts and feelings can drive someone to the point, like you mentioned, Shauna, that that's an outcome is I'm never going to get to this point, so I might as well just give up. And what comes with that is suicidal thoughts or ideations of just I might as well give up because I'm not going to make it anyways. And so I think a lot of things are very similar in the mental health perspective where they all kind of connect like that. And those type of thoughts and feelings may be the same in depression as they are in eating disorders and at least the thought processes about self-worth and stuff like that. I really feel like they interchange a lot. So I could see how that would be one of the parts that would fall right in line with the truth.
I was wondering like I would like to do some research on it, but like how when I guess is it like mostly like the individuals who died by suicide that previously had a diagnosis of an eating disorder, was it like an adolescent who like they were just caught by like their parents and all of a sudden they're like, uh-oh, like I'm caught and I don't want to be outed in front of everyone, or like was it like an adult that now like everything's catching up and people are finding out and it's kind of like a way to like I don't want to like I don't want people to know, so like is it there? I don't know. Like it made me curious of like when does this like generally happen? Like what does the data show? Is there data on it? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. They're already feeling anxiety about their weight, about their body, obsessing over it. Uh, the case study comes to mind of that I forget her name, but even though she wasn't extremely skinny, she still had anorexia because she was obsessing over her image and her weight. Uh,
Hmm.
and so so you're already feeling that shame, and so on top of that, the perceived public shame, yeah, that being enough to send you over the edge. Absolutely.
So I think part of why act is probably common if you have the ability to hide those things from other people, eating disorders, things of that nature, then you're going to be more likely to be able to hide the ideology behind having a suicidal thought or attempt. Because if you can hide
Mhm.
that very well, you're going to hide the rest and get a lot further than somebody else who just wants to express themselves and say, I want you to know I'm hurting, so I just want to kill myself. And you
Hmm.
tell people and you make that known versus being accustomed to hiding everything.
Yeah, very similar to addiction.
Hmm.
I definitely agree with that. Like I relate everything to me. I just watch too much TV. But I always think of the White Lotus this past season where he committed fraud and then it seemed like he was going to kill himself the entire season because he was scared of people finding out. And it seems like a lot of times people, when they do commit suicide, a lot of times it's after someone, yeah, has found out about something and then they have all the extra pressure on themselves. They might not be able to handle it anymore because before it was just how they felt about themselves. But once your
Yeah,
family finds out and wants to send you to rehab or wants you to do this, then it's like
yeah,
now you have so many other people looking down on you, and it might even make everything seem more heightened because you no longer are only trying to make yourself better. You now have to make yourself better for other people. And if you don't, then other people could be affected.
Right.
yes.
You're taking away that they're feeling like they're forced into a really fast-paced treatment plan for them to be like, okay, well, I know this about you and I want to help you and let's go through this and let's go through this. And they're just not in that mental capacity just yet to understand that what they're doing is damaging their body, damaging their mental health, because oftentimes us as humans, we try to rationalize everything that we do and we try to deem it as healthy, regardless of what it is. Like that's why, we have high addiction rates. We have, unfortunately high suicidal rates just because we feel like everything that we're thinking or eating or smoking or whatever the case may be, it's going to be beneficial for us, even though it's not beneficial for our body. So when, like you said, Shauna, when somebody finds out, and it puts that extra pressure. So it's just like, oh, well, I can't really do this for myself. So now I have to do this for this other person and this other person and this other. It's just like a lot of stuff piling on top of them.
Right. I also had, I'm sorry, I'm switching gears because my another thought popped into my head.
You're good.
While watching the like sleep video, the one on sleeping disorders, I thought it was obviously like it makes sense, but like I don't think about it until like it's brought up, and then I'm like, yeah, well, that makes sense. How like the sleep varies across the lifespan. So obviously, like it would be interesting to see how many times like someone might be like diagnosed with a sleeping disorder, but it is more of like based on their like point in their life. Like if you have someone who's like an adolescent who's like requiring more sleep, but if you have someone that's like, oh, like they're sleeping too much or different parts of their life, I was just wondering how like misdiagnosed people are, like because of the like point in their lifespan, or if they're like in the like middle point of like switching from one point of like needing more sleep to needing less sleep. Like I wonder how much people are misdiagnosed.
I feel like elders might be misdiagnosed a lot because they're like, oh, they're getting old. Of course they're gonna sleep all day. Or they can't sleep at all night. Also those during menopause. I know a lot I haven't
Mhm.
experienced menopause yet, but a lot of people I know who have and moms, they cannot sleep and they get so hot. And I feel like some of them might actually get misdiagnosed before they realize it's menopause because it's a sleep disorder, but it's actually just their hormones changing.
Right. For instance, on Wednesdays, I work in a mental health setting in a jail, and a lot of those guys, even though I get there at noon, are still sleeping. Uh, and that's a really complex thing because some of that is part of their diagnosis, some of that is reactions to the medication that they're on. Some is environmental stressors. It's a really complex thing, but the end result is the same of their sleep until the afternoon because they can't sleep at
I will say, I have found that avoiding day shift COs is kind of a common thing, and sleeping during the
night.
day and staying up at night is a very common thing in that
Yep.
arena. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Oh, I didn't think about that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Similarly, Just in terms of elimination disorders in general, I was surprised one that its own when it comes to the reading that was on Canvas about elimination in terms of uh, urination and soiling yourself. I was surprised one that that is its own separate diagnosis, but then also that the comorbidity rate was as low as it was. It said like 20 to 30%, 20 to 50% for both of those, and I thought it would have been much higher because I always thought of elimination as a symptom of some other disorder. I hadn't thought about it as its own thing before, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
No, it totally does.
I was gonna say I hadn't really seen it as a separate until now either.
The only one I really ever think of when I think of sleep disorders is, well, insomnia. But when I think of insomnia, sadly, I go to anxiety and depression also being a
Right.
reason slash cause or a stemming from that. And then I think of narcolepsy a lot, which I feel like narcolepsy is a little bit of a harder one to misdiagnose just due to how someone can just fall asleep so quickly they can't even drive because of it. So that one I think is harder to misdiagnose. Whereas insomnia, I feel like is so easy to just hand out to anyone and give anyone meds for. Like I was given sleeping meds just because I cannot sleep. Have I taken them yet? No, because I think I choose to not sleep on purpose. But my psychiatrist was like, I'll just throw in some meds. Here's some candy for you.
Right.
I feel like insomnia is really easy to misdiagnose because I think it's just so normalized and people believe that anyone can have insomnia. And it
Right.
feels like,
Just take an Ambien.
yeah, it's like, is there like truly like how I don't know how to word this. It's kind of like you can just say you're not sleeping, they'll give you sleeping pills. And so it's so easily misdiagnosed because you just want people to sleep. Although it's like, what's the difference between someone not being able to fall asleep, but once they are asleep, they can sleep fine versus someone who truly does not sleep until 7 and then can never fall asleep. And then that's like when it's like a week long thing or for 2 weeks they don't sleep at all.
Right. To go
Right.
back to the show you were talking about, Kayla, you were talking about White Lotus, right? In that example that
Mhm.
you gave. That character throughout his suicidal ideation, all that anxiety, also can't sleep. So he starts taking his wife's lorazepam, right?
And it's crazy how when she takes it, because she truly does need it, it doesn't make her sleepy as much. It helps calm her down in social situations and she can still function. And it does help her sleep when she needs it. But it also shows, I think, in a great depiction, how truly those meds are not helpful if you don't need it. Because for him, they just knocked him out and made him truly, he also was taking them way more than he should have. But it really shows that like it knocked him out completely because he truly was taking them in the wrong way when it shouldn't even be doing that.
Right, because of the brain chemistry. It's like with any medication that you don't have the right channels, the right prescription for. It's not treating the thing it's supposed to treat, so it has these often very strange side effects.
It's
Yeah.
just crazy how much in the mental health world you have to like rely upon self-report.
Mm-hmm.
It's not I you know, I don't know, the way I'm looking at it, like it doesn't seem as like simple as like a lot of the like physical health because if I say my arm is broken, you can take an x-ray and be like, yes, confirmed. But if I say like I'm not sleeping at night, like they can't just like sit in my house and like wait for me to sleep, be like, you're lying. Like so it's so crazy to me like how much we have to rely upon like the self-report, like especially even like when people are getting prescribed medication for the like mental health like diagnosis. It's wild in a sense that we have to rely on self-report only for the most part.
Which
Especially
is good.
because especially when they don't even know like what to talk about. Like right now, like I like am very open book. Like I want to up my Lexapro, but I don't know why. Like I just know in my body like I need a little bit more, but I don't know how to explain this ain't working. Besides, I feel nothing different, and it's like hard. I want to believe me because like I know my own body, but it's hard to self-report when you truly don't even know what you should be looking out for. But they also don't know because it's all in your all in your brain. But then like there's some people who I know have had like terrible side effects on Lexapro and I haven't. And then it shows like, okay, yeah, they need to self-report that though, because that shows that yeah, Lexapro is not for you. But some people might not want to admit that because they're like, oh, well, I don't want to have to try 10 different medications. And I think that's also what's hard with medications is that if you don't self-report, you may never get help because then what you might think of just a normal side effect isn't actually normal and you shouldn't be experiencing it, but you believe that it is a normal side effect as well.
It's why pharmacotherapy is so important, right? That someone can say anything, but over, weekly sessions over however many months, the trained counselor can kind of see through, not that they're not always being honest about how they're feeling, but you can more accurately be like, well, you said this, but based on what you said over these few weeks, it sounds like also this or instead of this.
Yeah, I
Uh,
kind of I don't know if this is a like a thing. I kind of wish sometimes like practices like had a psychiatrist for that practice where like it was allowed for the therapist and psychiatrist to work together and be in the same sessions when they were talking about medication management so that way it could be like hey like over our sessions this is what I believe what we've talked about versus a client having to find their own psychiatrist and going to see them like on their own and having to go based off just what the client is saying about themselves when a therapist might not even agree and the therapist might actually have a better understanding what's going on because I don't know if that's even allowed. Maybe it's not. But sometimes I kind of wish that like it was more of a collaborative experience, at least when maybe putting someone on meds for the first time versus someone having to do it all on their own and go through all those channels and figure out how to really describe what's going on.
a lot of people do. A lot
Coordination
of
of
people even have,
care.
yeah, a lot of people have psychiatric nurses as part of their practice for that exact purpose.
Well, but on top of that, the book's trying to get us to make those connections. A
Yes.
lot of this is trying to explain to us that what we need to do is work better with other stakeholders. That's why I keep mentioning stakeholders, and partnerships, and
Yes.
also case notes, being specific on case notes, along with the treatment plans, the ideas that we're going through. And that's why I do appreciate on our part we're probably going to get the most hands-on with individuals beyond a drug treatment place or something like that because they're going to see it more often. Other than that, therapist is going to see you week to week, every other week, once a month. These frequencies, being able to do that, have good case notes, and correspond with other stakeholders, can also communicate, hey, I know you put them on this, but here's certain things that I'm seeing. I just want you to be aware of it and give them the tip because if you give somebody the keys they need to see, and then you go back to see the psychiatrist, they may be able to quickly get to those areas and get the same impression because they have the foundation already laid for them. And so I think it's why it's really important to do these parts on how we interact with each other. Because I know for me in my world, which was, like I said, drug treatment before, I don't know if I mentioned it here, but when people brought me the information, I could figure it out in a very short period of time. You give me the key parts I need, I'll
Yes.
walk through the situation, figure it out, and go, okay, they're right. I'm not going to go off what they said. I'm going to figure out myself, but I know exactly where to go. And when I get there, I can figure
Hmm.
it out. I go, they're exactly right, and I already figured it out. Cool.
Yes.
I know what to do with it. And so it makes a big difference.
You can sift through the chaff or the unnecessary parts.
For sure. And so I think that even going back to the treatment planning on that page 109, if y'all are following along, look, but it talked about necessity, improvement, and potentiality. And so I think that can kind of segue into what we were just talking about that, I mean, first we're working on basic needs, things that people need, job and doing putting in applications like you were talking about earlier, some of the basic needs in the beginning, social supports, things of that nature. And then I do love that they bring up that don't forget that suicidal parts take precedent. So if they're
Right.
in those areas, those are not improvement, those are necessities. And so then once we're doing the improvement part, I think that is a lot where that area of working with medications, other partners, trying to make all those parts work. Because I think once the improvement starts and people see success, then I believe it's a lot easier to do the potentiality later. Because then once people see success, then you've got something to go. You've got a mood, not a mood, but you've got everything pointing in a different direction. Once things start going better and they're going on the up and up and everything is getting better, the potential is seen by individuals, which then you can build on and take off with. And I think that's the area where you can start to clean up some of those medication issues and certain things and tighten some of that up because then they're not so stuck on trying to get what they want and hide the certain things from people in certain ways like that because they're really wanting to better themselves.
Right.
No, I agree with that 100%.
Yeah. I think we had another really great discussion today, guys.
Yeah, that was good.
I liked it. And I'm excited to see what we do next week as well with the learning activity next week.
Yeah.
Yeah.